Hi, hello. This workshop is called Climate Conversations, How to Get People Talking About the Climate Emergency. And actually, I've ended up with two workshops, which you and your teacher can decide whether you want to have both of them or just to run the first one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, in a minute, share my screen. And for most of the workshop, you'll just be hearing my voice and looking at my PowerPoint. Do excuse me if I fumble a bit. It's the first time I've recorded a workshop like this, so I'm on a learning curve. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen, and I am going to bring up my PowerPoint here. Right, and then make it full screen. Okay, so here we are. The purpose of this workshop is to give you some tools and some ideas about how you can have conversations about the climate emergency that we're living through with your friends, with your family, with people you bump into. I should say that I'm not going to be going into the facts about climate change. I'm assuming that you will be talking about those in your lessons at school as part of your curriculum, or through some of the other workshops to do with the Schools Climate Education South Yorkshire Conference. So really what I'm focusing on is the skills you need, some tips and some skills for getting a positive, a constructive climate conversation going. Just a little bit about who I am. My background's in drama. So I'm a drama teacher by background, and I used to work at the Crucible Theatre, and there's a picture here of a play that I did with young people at the Crucible a long time ago now. But I've also been for quite some time a climate activist, and 6 years ago at the 2015 Paris conference, which was a very important conference in terms of climate change, I went, and I was one of thousands of people who were painting banners like this and doing things out in the streets, as well as going to some of the formal debates and discussions that were taking place there. And you may realize that there's a new, very important climate conference coming up in this country in November that's called COP26. Now, I'll move on from that. So this workshop that I'm running, I'm basically going to give you a number of topics to talk about, and I'm going to move through them fairly quickly. I'll give you a stimulus for each one, and I'll ask your teacher to pause the video. And teacher, if you could organize then how people hold their discussions. In general, it'd be great if people could have talk partners, could talk in pairs. I realize you might have to have a three somewhere for the discussion. And then after that, you may want to have a bit of a discussion with the whole class to feed back on the discussion in pairs, or else you could move on to the next topic. In my PowerPoint, I put this little logo with the two people chatting, and that means it's time for discussion in pairs or small groups. Okay, so going on to the first stimulus that I'm going to offer you, I'm going to play you a short video from YouTube, and I'd like you, as you watch it, just to notice your own reactions to it, just to notice your own reactions to it, and then you're going to be discussing that afterwards. Now, I'm now going to change what I'm doing on my share. So let's see if I can get this right. Oh, I think I'm getting there. Okay, here we are. I'm going to also share sound and optimize the video clip and see if we can get this to play for you. And I hope the quality is okay. Fingers crossed. Right, it's only a couple of minutes. Off we go.
I believe we should look for a call to action. And once we see the action, hope will inevitably come.
My life, or our lives as human beings, are 100% dependent on nature.
It's crazy how much it affects us, but how much people don't recognize it and realize what it actually is. Human beings are the biggest causes of climate change. But the good thing is there's a solution, and we are part of the solution. There are a number of solutions to climate change, and we don't need to research them. They're already there. A lot of people just think we need to plant trees, but it just doesn't end there. We need to focus on change of mindset, change of mentality. If we are to start, if we are to mitigate the effects of climate change, if we are to end global warming, then we must start young. We must focus on adding curricula that is going to benefit them and the environment.
If we work together as a common family, just one family, in combating and fighting against this climate change and putting in measures then we're likely to protect our future.
Governments need to definitely increase trial allocations towards areas, sectors, ideas, ideals that are meant to tackle climate change.
We as young people should be included more and should be given a lot of chances to actually articulate our issues with regard to climate change.
We must make sure that everything we do is for climate equity and climate justice.
They need to be aware of all the affairs that are actually happening. So we need to create platforms for them so that they get to be exposed and also understand that they are also partners in driving sustainable development.
Because that's how we'll know we matter. My message to all the children, all the youth, all the adults, all the elderly, even the toddlers is you can be the change. You can be the change the world is looking for right now.
Because at the end of the day, we have a future to protect and we've got an environment to protect as well.
Climate change is an issue. In fact, it's a defining issue, and we're living at a defining moment, and we are the ones who will define how we created this revolution and how we put an end to climate change. My name is Yande Banda and I'm 15 years old.
Let's get to be responsible and stand out.
Great. Okay, so I'm just stopping that and I'll go back to my PowerPoint now. Here we are. Let's bring that up. Great. I'm going to go on to the next slide if I got it right. Yes. Okay. So what I'd like you to do in a minute, I'll just explain the task and then teacher, if you could organize it. I'd like you to have a chat with your talk partner, possibly 3 of you in a group, and just see, did you have similar or different reactions to the video? And I've put a few questions here to maybe help you think about this. So number 1, which aspects of the video did you especially notice? Which things struck you? What did you feel as you watched it? Emotions. What problems did the video raise? And what solutions did it refer to? And finally, what were the presenters in the video wanting you to do? So I will now freeze myself and I won't freeze myself. I'll hand over to the teacher. If you could freeze me, pause the video and set up those discussions. And I suggest that people have a couple of minutes to talk about that. And then you may want to discuss it a little bit in the main group before you come back to me. Thank you. Okay, so I will now go on to the next section. I asked you a number of questions there that you may have just talked about. I wanted to throw this in, so a bit of head work to think for a minute about this. So there are lots of ways that you can talk about climate change. You can talk about the facts. You can say to someone, do you know the facts about global warming? You can talk about the feelings. What do people feel about the climate emergency? What do they feel about politics? What do they feel about having to change the way they live, maybe? Interpretations. That means you got the facts, you got your feelings, but when you bring your head to it, how do you interpret those facts and feelings? What meanings do you give to that? So you, in interpreting, for example, the things that you saw, the photographs and images in that video, you might be saying, well, what do you think the biggest challenges are in terms of addressing climate change? And what are the best solutions? And how can we get there? And, blah, blah, blah. Or that's that kind of like more serious discussion, if you like. And then, of course, it's a question of actually doing something, actions. What can you actually do to your carbon footprint? What do we think governments should do? What should business people do? What should schools be doing? So I find this quite useful when thinking about the different aspects of any complex issue. This FFIA, it's a bit like FIFA, but in the wrong order. And I just want to highlight for you that when you're talking about climate change, it is possible that some people may have strong feelings about it. Not everyone, but they might. They might just say, don't even want to talk about it, really fed up with it. They might say, I'm really angry about it, blah, 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 whatever they say. People can have strong feelings about this. So it really helps when you're having climate conversations if you're tactful with people and if you're respectful. I know you hear that all the time about being respectful, but it really means something here. So, if you're talking with somebody about climate change, listen to where they're coming from, respect where they're coming from. They may have different views from you, that's fine. Just listen and try to understand their point of view. And I think a useful way to think about this is think of your conversations as thinking together. We're thinking together. No one knows the answers to this huge problem, but it's really interesting, I think, to get thinking together with friends and family and other people you meet about these interesting challenges. Okay, next slide. A couple of more things I want to say to you about climate conversations, and I'll stop talking at you. So as we go through this workshop, apart from being respectful with each other, there's no right or wrong answers. My aim is to get you talking and thinking. But I do want to say a couple of things to you about why have climate conversations. Now, I think there's two main reasons. Firstly, making our societies sustainable is the most enormous challenge, and it's going to affect every single person on the planet. Everyone. Therefore, we all need to talk about how we're going to handle it. There isn't anybody who isn't going to be affected, who isn't already affected. Secondly, in order to make a lot of big changes happen, we've got to get the politicians to do things. Doesn't matter what party they're in or which you support, they've all got to think about this. And they will only take the matter really seriously when they know that ordinary people, and of course adults are voters, when they know that those people really want them to. We've got to keep their feet to the fire. Now, in terms of young people, why should you, as young people, be talking about climate change? Well, again, two reasons. This thing is going to affect your whole life. It will affect the jobs you do. It'll affect the way your country works, where you travel, all kinds of things. It's going to affect your whole life, hopefully in lots of positive ways. And politicians are increasingly realizing that you are the voters of the future. When all the youth demonstrations happened, they really began to sit up and listen. And in the photograph you can see here, in fact, there's a Conservative, a Lib Dem, a Labour, and a Green MP all in that image. They're all beginning to listen. They realize that you are the voters of the future. Okay, another exercise to talk about, a thinking together exercise. So there's lots of different terms that are used around climate change. You can choose the one that you want to, but a little bit of a thinking exercise together in your pairs, or however your teacher puts you. Which of these terms mean the same thing and which mean different things? Teacher, I suggest you just give people a couple of minutes for a quick chat about this thinking together, and you could pause me now. Okay, so this is me coming back in. Perhaps you've had a bit of a chat about these different terms, and I tend to use climate emergency and climate change, but it does depend on the context, what I'm talking about and who I'm talking to. So you can choose the terms that make most sense to you. I'd like to say a little bit more about conversations. Okay, so conversations are part of what makes us human and how society works. We're always talking to each other. Now, each conversation happens because there's some kind of stimulus. Something provokes it, yeah? So something happens near you. I don't know, cat suddenly runs out in front of you or something comes up in the media. Perhaps you're listening to something in a podcast, your radio, whatever, something comes up that makes you think about something. Or somebody actually raises a topic, you know, in words, or it could be on social media. They might say, what did you think of Maneskin's song? Have you ever watched this program or that program? Have you seen these new trainers? Do you rate them? I know this sounds obvious, but I'm saying this because when we're having climate conversations, it's really helpful if there's a stimulus. And sometimes that stimulus might come from outside you. Something happens and you can say, oh, that's a good chance to get talking about climate change. Or it might be, I think I might raise a topic with this person. Yeah. Okay. So another point I want to make is that climate conversations can be either spontaneous, immediate, they can just happen, or they can be planned. So for the next talking exercise, I'd like you to talk again and to think about spontaneous conversations. Now, I know that things are a bit different with the pandemic, but you're probably out and about a lot more than me as young people. Could you have a chat together about in what situations in your life can you imagine that a spontaneous conversation about climate change could get going? What might be the stimulus? What might set it off? And once it has been set off, what could you say, well, to firstly start the conversation or to keep it going? Okay, so again, teacher, I think people could chat about this for a couple of minutes or something, maybe 3 or 4 minutes, I think maybe 2 or 3 minutes, whatever. And then you might want to chat about it in the whole class before you come back to me. So I'll pause and let you get on with that. Okay, and this is me coming back in. So I wonder what stimuli you came up with. I thought I'd just share a couple of examples from me. So before the pandemic, and I used to use taxis a lot. I don't have a car. So, and I had loads of conversations with taxi drivers, and the kind of topics were things like electric cars, electric cabs, traffic jams, too much traffic on the roads, could we cut down the traffic? It's really important in terms of cutting carbon emissions, etc. Toxicity charges, which you might know about, especially in big cities. And actually in recent years, we've had a lot of unusually hot weather. You know, sometimes all I had to say was, oh God, it's hot today. And then we were off, you know, and they would say, well, yeah, you know what it is. And we'd have that conversation. And sometimes I'd explicitly raise a topic. You know, what do you think of the toxicity charge? You will learn a lot if you talk to people and ask questions, people who know more than you about a particular area of work. And I just noticed recently that actually I wasn't having to raise the topic so much. I think the general feeling is now a lot of people are aware of climate change. What they're not so sure about is what they can actually do about it. So getting a conversation going about what the solutions are can be a way forward. If the topic comes up in some way, say, yeah, what do you think the solution is? And can you see any ways forward for that? And they, you know, you might disagree about the solutions, but that could be a good way into having a positive conversation about the way forward. Okay, next. So some useful phrases you might use to have a positive conversation, even if you disagree with the other person. There are a million phrases, you'll find your own, but here's some suggestions. I agree with you, obviously you might say. That sounds like a positive thing to say. You might want to disagree, but in a nice way. I get what you're saying, but I see it differently because, you know, my point of view is different, perhaps because of something that you've learned or experienced or read about. You could share your own worries. Do you know what worries me about this? You know, you sort of make yourself a little bit kind of, you open yourself to kind of being a bit more vulnerable, and that can make a more kind of honest sort of conversation. Now, what if someone is actually really adamant about something that you disagree with? And well, what you could do is just recognize that they feel really strongly. You obviously feel really strongly about that. I get that, you know, but what do you think the solution is? Again, try and move it on to the positive discussion about the way forward. And you could say exactly that. I think the way forward could be. This is especially if someone's being very negative about the situation. Okay, just a few suggestions there. Right, now, you may not buy this. Some of my friends have said to me, look, Nick, no. These conversations either happen spontaneously or they don't happen at all. But actually, I'm telling you, it may feel less natural, but you actually can plan a climate conversation, because I've done it. I've done it quite a lot of times now. You know, if it's something that you care about, but you actually haven't talked about it very much with family or friends, you could say, look, I know this is a bit unusual, but you're actually one of my best friends, and I've never really talked to you about climate change. Or, you know, Mum, I've never really talked to you about it, or Uncle, whatever. You know, it's something I care about and concerned about. Could we sit down and have a chat about it sometime? And my experience is that most people say, oh, all right then, why not? Let's have a chat. And I've had some really good chats with members of my family and with friends in that way. Just getting my courage up to say, I'd like to have that conversation with you. Obviously, you can have the spontaneous climate conversations. You can just raise it on the spur of the moment. You might just be, I don't know, going out shopping, chatting, whatever, turning a telly over. What do you think about global warming, Nana? Why not? Why not just raise it? And I really like what Alex, one of my colleagues, says. She says, why not just ask every member of your family and all your friends what they think about it? That's a simple way in, isn't it? Okay, moving on. Here's some tips. These tips actually come from a very useful little handbook produced by an organization called Climate Outreach. And they suggest this mnemonic, REAL, R-E-A-L, as some useful points to bear in mind when you're holding a climate conversation. So teacher, perhaps you could just chair a bit of a discussion with everyone, I think in the whole class, just for a minute or two. What does everyone think the letters R-E-A-L stand for if you're thinking about good advice for having a positive climate conversation? I'll pause for a minute and let you have that discussion. Okay, I wonder what you came up with. You might have noticed that earlier on I used the word respect, and R in this particular approach is respect. Here's a lot. So it helps if you respect your conversation partner. it actually helps if you enjoy the conversation. It's a really interesting thing to talk about, loads of different aspects, and it's a way to get to know somebody better. You don't always want to have serious conversations. I know you could even have a light and jokey conversation about climate change. Enjoy it. Now, to keep the conversation going, rather than you talking at people, I'm probably talking at you too much now, the important thing is to try and find out where the other person's coming from. So ask them questions, ask them what they think, ask them what they know about, ask them about their feelings, all those things I talked about earlier, their interpretations. And when they start telling you things, listen. Listen to, don't just cut in there and disagree with them. Listen to what they're saying and show what you've heard. Show that you have heard. Even if you want to disagree. I hear what you're saying, but you know, I have a different point of view. Now, I just want to say something here. You may feel that in order to have a conversation about climate change, you need to know lots about it. Lots of people say, I just don't know enough about it. It's so complicated. It's very technical. It's scientific. All of that is true. But do you know what? Let's think about the pandemic for a minute. You don't say to someone like your brother or your sister, oh, I can't talk about the pandemic with you because neither of us is an epidemiologist. You talk about the pandemic because it's something that's affecting your life. And you know, one of the problems with climate change is it feels like a very distant thing, but actually it does affect our lives in lots of ways. You don't have to be a scientist or an expert to talk about the many different aspects of our lives that climate change affects now, and it's going to affect in the future. Okay, so this is the end of workshop 1. You could stop here, or you could go on to the next workshop. I'll do a separate recording for that. There are more discussion topics in that really to dig into. Some of those are maybe a bit more suitable for Y9 upwards, but I'll let your teacher decide. If you are stopping here, I think it would be good to stop and reflect on the conversations you've had so far in your pairs or small groups and in the whole class. Teacher, you could ask people, you know, how they found the workshop, and do they feel more confident now about getting a real climate conversation going? And if you say you don't feel more confident yet, that's fine. There's more to learn here, but I'll tell you something, you learn by practicing. So I'll pause now and actually end this recording so that the teacher can have that discussion with you. And then I'll start a new recording for the second workshop for those people who are going on to it. Thank you very much. Hi, so this is Nick Nutchins again, and this is the second workshop which follows up on my first one on climate conversations, what we call it, how to get people talking about the climate emergency. And basically in this second workshop, I'm giving you some more topics to discuss. I'm going to share my screen now to bring up my PowerPoint, which is here. And actually I'll share sound and all of that, optimize for video clicks. So we might have a video clip in a minute. Right, and here we are. So this is workshop number 2. My suggested topic for your next discussion in pairs, or possibly a 3, is this. How often do you talk about the pandemic? And how often do you talk about climate change? Now, by way of background, there was a study in 2019 in America by the Yale Program on Climate Change Communication, which found that 85% of Americans say that they never talk about climate change. I wonder why not? And are you any different? Because the figures in this country are not so different. Okay, so I'm going to suggest that, teacher, that you pause the video. Excuse me, just getting my bit of paper to work out my timings. I reckon people will need something like 3 minutes or so in their pairs to talk about this. If it goes on a bit longer, that's fine. And then you might want to have a similar length of discussion back together in the whole class. So this will be a good moment to pause now. Thank you. Okay, and this is me coming back in. I hope you've had some really interesting conversations there. So just to say, referring back to the first workshop we ran, remember this mnemonic, funny word, mnemonic, real, to respect your conversation partner, enjoy your conversation, ask questions to draw people out and show interest, and listen. So listen and show that you've heard. Now, here's just a few questions that might be the kind of thing that'd be useful. I talked last time about you possibly raising the topic initially to get a conversation going, And you can also ask questions to keep a conversation going. I also mentioned last time that there are different types of aspects of talking about something. I remembered I talked about, you might remember, FFIA, facts, feelings, interpretations, and actions. So here's some example questions that you could possibly ask somebody. Do you know how solar panels work? That's about facts. How do you feel about climate change? That's obviously about emotions. What do your family think about it? I suppose that's a bit more about facts, really. That's like researching. What do your family think about it? What do you think ordinary people can do? Now, that's in the realm of interpretations, like analysing it. You know, how do we go forward from here? Ordinary people as opposed to politicians, for example. And then more to do with kind of action, I suppose. Would you like to work in an eco job? Is that something you'd like to do in the future? So there's a whole range of interesting questions that you can ask. Right, let's move on. Now, I had a climate conversation with a young friend of mine who's 18 and who's in her first year at university, called Janelle. And I wrote down what she said. And this is a quote from her. It's never something I think about, especially today with a pandemic, being at university, being with friends, thinking what job I'll have. It isn't in the forefront of anyone's mind. There's nothing to make us talk about it. And anyway, why should I take a 5-minute shower instead of a 15-minute one when they aren't clearing up oil spills or repairing the damage that they're doing to the rainforest? I found the conversation with Janelle really interesting. So I'm going to suggest that you have a conversation about those points that she's brought up. Do you agree with her or do you disagree with her? And what would help her, or you, if you feel the same, to feel more motivated? So if you're talking to somebody like Janelle and they come up with things like that, what do you think would help them to feel more motivated? Obviously, you're going to listen, you're going to try and understand her point of view, you know, what makes her think that, what her feelings are about it, how much she knows the facts, all those kind of things. But what would you think would help her get a bit more engaged with this? Okay, teacher. So I think this is another one where people might want to talk for, I don't know, I guess about 3 minutes maybe, and then similarly 3 or 4 minutes back in the main group. So if you could pause the video now, thank you. Okay, so this is me coming back in. I hope you've had some really interesting discussions. This whole question of why people don't talk about it is a very rich and interesting and complicated question. There's a simple way of understanding that. There's quite a few answers, but you know, one main reason is that climate change is not like, well, I don't know, there's been a car crash at the bottom of your road and you rush out and look at it. You know, you heard it, you rushed out, what was that? You go out and you see the car crash at the bottom of your road. This is distant. It feels distant, it feels remote, it feels more abstract. It doesn't, climate change tends not to press our panic buttons, though that is beginning to change as we see more extreme weather events like floods and hot days and hot years and all that kind of thing. So it can seem that global warming is something distant, but the truth is it actually affects everything in our lives. It affects, you know, what we wear, what we eat, how we travel, what our jobs are going to be, all kinds of things. So when we're talking to people about climate change, one of the things we want to do is to make the connection with our own lives and their own lives. How does this affect us now? How is it going to affect us in the next 5 years or 10 years? Making the connection. Okay, so on the next slide, there are some pictures, and these pictures relate to actions that people can take to reduce their carbon emissions. Now, I'm guessing that you already know quite a lot about this, but you know, obviously actions, positive things you can do can be good conversation topics, focusing on solutions rather than focusing on all the difficulties. So I'm going to bring up this slide in a minute with these pictures. If you could have a look at them, talk about them with your talk partners or talk partner and discuss, what do you think the actions are? And can you actually see yourself, your friends or your family doing any of these things? Maybe you can, or maybe you can't. If you can, great. If you can't, why not? And while you're having that conversation, sharing with each other, thinking together with each other, you could remember real, that you're respecting each other, you're enjoying the conversation, you're asking each other questions, and you're listening and learning from each other. So teacher, if you could pause the video and again give people maybe a little bit longer, there's quite a few pictures, so they might want 3 or 4 or 5 minutes, and then you might want to come back into the whole class to discuss some of the points that people have picked up. Thank you. So here's the image. And now I will go quiet for a while. Okay, so this is me coming back in, and I hope you found that stimulating. As I said before, there are so many aspects of climate change, and it affects all these different parts of our lives. It's just a question of finding where we can relate to it. But some of the things that have to happen for climate change are great big things that we can't do much about, but governments are going to do something about, like sorting out fantastic low carbon trains. Some things we can do something about. We can choose what we eat. We can choose which clothes we wear. We can choose which cycle we put the washing on. Okay, let's go on to the next question here. So, are you enjoying your climate conversations? A little stop and check moment. I hope you are. How could you make your climate conversations more enjoyable or enjoyable? Here's a few ideas. Be relaxed. You don't have to solve it all right now. Pick your moment. Is this a good moment to have this chat? Be willing to listen and learn, because that's interesting and enjoyable. Try to end on a positive note in your conversation, and you might have some other ideas that you can talk about. Okay, going on to the next slide. Oh, forgot about that one. Why not have a laugh while you're at it? Okay. On the next slide, there are some more pictures related to climate change. These are maybe rather more distant than the previous lot of pictures. In a sense, these are perhaps talking about, like I said, the big picture pictures, rather than just kind of more immediate things in your life. Anyway, do you know, or can you guess what the connection is between each of these pictures and climate change? And then do ask yourself the question, how do these things, there's a word missing, I'm sorry. How do these things relate to your own life and what you're interested in? You're not interested in everything. Some of these things will interest you and some of them will bore you. Which of these things actually interest you? Teacher, if again, you could give people time to have that discussion in pairs or small groups. And I think, again, they might want, 3 or 4 or 5 minutes, depending how interesting they're finding it, and then discussion back in the group. I've put some notes on the next slide for you to feed back exactly what the images are. Thank you very much. I will go on to the next slide and then I'll pause. Here are the pictures. Okay, so this is me coming back in. I hope you found this interesting. I've tried to put a variety of different things in here. I think it's really interesting. A little thing I might throw in is the picture of the house, bottom right, is actually this house in just outside York in a place called Fulford. And I've been there. And it's called a passive house. And I was just completely amazed because the only heating they have in the house is the equivalent of one little single bar electric fire. That's the only heating they have, and they have that in order to keep the main kind of like sort of mechanical system working in case it needs it. But actually, the house has such thick walls, it doesn't need heating, and that's saving them hundreds, if not thousands of pounds a year. Imagine what difference that would make to everyone in this country if they didn't have to pay for their heating energy. Okay, let's go on. So this is a video. And I'm going to put that on in a second. And I'd like you to have a look at it and then talk about it. So please watch the short video and afterwards discuss what you think it's a video of. What is a design actually? What's it a design for? It's obviously for some kind of transport, what's the word, vehicle. Would you like to travel in it? What problems might it solve? What problems might it have? Okay, we'll come back to those questions in a second. I'm just going to change the share here so I can bring up the video. It's only a couple of minutes and here we go. When I get it going. I'm going to stop it there and come out of that, because I think you've got the measure of it. And we'll go back to the PowerPoint and the questions. So get rid of that. And here we are. So if have a chat again, you probably were chatting a bit while you were watching it. Have a chat for a couple of minutes, and again, share in the whole group, and then come back to me. So I'll go quiet now and let you get on with it. Thank you, teacher. Okay, so this is me coming back in. Again, I hope you found that interesting. I found it really interesting. So you probably worked out what this is. Oh, why is it? Oh, here we are. It's an airship, and there's a rather old one on the top of the screen, and then I think, I'm not sure that's a design, a model for a newer one down bottom right. This may be a new thing that will come in. It may not be for carrying people, it might be for carrying cargo, but it's an example of new technology. Now, I want to ask you this question. You know, some of us tend to be glass half full people, some of us tend to be glass half empty people. Which are you? When it comes to climate change, are you pessimistic or are you optimistic that we'll find great solutions to everything? Here's some pictures here. The rather red picture is a famous painter called John Martin, who liked to paint disasters. And, you know, it's a bit like an early version of disaster movies. And then you've got a bit of Mad Max there. But we've also got loads and loads of really exciting, interesting solutions that people are coming up with. Some of them very technical, scientific, and some of them maybe more to do with how we organize people and society. So I'd like you to have a conversation now about these questions here. You know, do you tend to be a bit of a pessimist, or are you actually quite optimistic? And, you know, of the possible solutions, which ones excite you and why? So, teacher, I'll hand over to you to organize that discussion for however long you think, and then to come back to me. Thank you. Okay, so coming back in, this whole thing about being positive, forward-looking, looking to the benefits. You know, by addressing some of the problems of climate change, we might actually have a better society. Lots of exciting new discoveries might be made, better ways of doing things, cheaper ways of living, healthier ways of living, all of those sort of things. I just want to share something with you. There's a very interesting project called Project Drawdown, and they've looked at all of the problems of climate change and made a list of the solutions which they think are the most positive ones. And they've come up with, you can find their website, 100 solutions to reverse global warming. So this is another topic you could continue to have a separate discussion about now, either in pairs or in the whole group, or you could go and research it on your own. What solutions do you know about? Are there some solutions here on the Project Drawdown website, for example, that you haven't thought about, you don't know about, and that you could maybe tell people when you're talking to them about climate change? I always think when you're having climate conversations, it's nice if you've got a few positive ideas you can throw people in people's direction. I'll just pick out one here. You might see in the middle of the screen, so fairly low down, it says in brown, educating girls. Now that might not seem anything that's directly to do with the atmosphere heating up and carbon emissions, all that kind of thing. But there's a lot of research that shows that educating girls across the world, particularly in developing countries, makes a huge, huge difference. I wonder if you can think why that might be. I'm not going to answer that question. I'll leave that with you. So teacher, if you want to have a bit more of a discussion about this, you could do that, or we could go on. Okay. This is the last exercise that I'm proposing for you to discuss. And it's about this question of values. Your values are things that are really important to you, kind of almost like concepts. For you, it might be wisdom, love, fun, science, sport, the things that is so different for different people. This is a point that I want to make, that values are very different for different people, and people care about different things. So for example, talking about animals can be a really great way in to have a climate conversation. if you want to talk about the fact that there are fewer butterflies around than there used to be, or species dying out, a lot of people feel really concerned about that. Some people are really, concerned about the polar bear. Now, the polar bear has become a bit of a cliche, I'm afraid. And some people go, oh, don't talk to me about polar bears. I actually don't care about polar bears. So you have to find out where that particular person is coming from. So this is my suggestion for you to have a bit of a conversation now. When it comes to building a sustainable society, what is it that you personally care about? I'm not saying what your guardians, parents, teachers, what you care about. You may care about some things and you really may be completely unmoved by others. What do you think is important? And in terms of going forwards, what do you think needs to change? Now, I just want to throw something else at you before you have this practice exercise, this discussion. It's not practice, it's a real meaningful discussion. So I just want to say a couple of things. Values are really personal. When people are talking about what they really care about, it means a lot to them. And also, you may not have thought about this very much. This might be quite new stuff for you to think about. So when you're having these conversations, it's really important to remember that R in real, to be really respectful, and that L, to listen. It's not for you to tell someone else they shouldn't have a value, that they shouldn't feel that that's important. You're just listening and learning. People have different values. And to make that happen more clearly, I'm actually going to suggest you do this particular conversation in a more structured way. So I want you to do this. I know it's an exercise, it's a listening exercise. It's a bit artificial, but I think it's got a purpose. I'd like you to take turns. I'd like the teacher to say, you've got 2 minutes each, for example. First person, person A, you're going to talk for 2 minutes. Then teacher says, okay, swap over. Could be 3 minutes. 2 minutes seems like a good start. So one person speaks and the other one listens, and then you swap over when the teacher tells you to. So when you're speaking, you can think out loud, whatever you're thinking and sharing, and the other person is listening with respect, and you know that they will do this. You'll do the same when you swap over. Okay, so when you're listening, you may find it hard. Please don't talk, just listen. You can back channel, bit of a funny word, but when you are interested with what someone's saying, you're nodding, you're smiling, but yeah, just don't look like you're really bored. Look like you're interested. Now, if the other person really dries up, you could ask a question to encourage them to say more. But I find that if you just stay quiet and just listen, maybe I'm talking about it and I kind of go, I don't know what to say next. And then a new idea comes to me. So sometimes just listening patiently will allow people to come up with, their next thought. So I'd like you to try it. I know it may feel like a bit of an artificial exercise, but the quality of listening in our discussions is very important and we need to practice it. So teacher, if you could set that up, I'd really appreciate that. Thank you. And I'll pause. Okay, so I hope that you found that interesting and perhaps learned some interesting things about each other. When I've done this exercise with other groups, people have come up with some really important things for them. And if you didn't really find it easy to talk about what your values are, that's fine. You're young. You've got time to find out what your values are. There's no rush at anything. It's just something to get you thinking. And just to say, when it comes to conversations about climate change, I've talked about facts and feelings and interpretations and actions, things that people do. But underlying all of that, this is a question of people's values, what they feel is important in life. And that runs through really a lot of climate change discussions. Okay, so how did you find the exercise? You might have already talked about that. Did you manage to listen without interrupting the other person's flow? Some people find that really, really hard to do. Now, I just want to say something about what happens if you're talking with someone and they really disagree with you. Perhaps they question the whole concept of climate change, maybe, or they really disagree with your take on it. When that happens, just bear in mind everything else that I've said here. Be a good listener. Try to understand where that person's coming from. They will have their reasons why they think that. They will have developed those ideas. They'll have got those values because it's something to do with their background, perhaps their culture, their religion, their faith, whatever their background is, particular things that have happened in their lives, jobs they've done, etc. So it's really helpful just to listen and understand their point of view. And even if you disagree, you will learn something from them about their perspective. Okay, last slide then, just to say, time maybe for a bit of reflection. A teacher, you could manage this discussion. Have people found these particular discussion topics in this second workshop useful? Did you enjoy your conversations? I just want to make a note here also about the fact that some people do find that talking about the climate and ecological emergencies can make them feel a bit anxious. These are big, tricky questions. If this does happen to you, please go and talk to someone, talk to your teacher or somebody in your family or a good friend that you trust. And remember that there are loads of good solutions already out there. We just need to make them happen. Thank you so much for having these conversations with me. I hope you're finding the whole conference useful and interesting, and good luck with whatever you decide to do in having climate conversations with your family, friends, and other people. Thank you. Cheers. Bye-bye.